Nate Code. Welcome to Med Decode. Today we are diving deep into a topic that, pretty much every parent in the modern world is dealing with: infant screen time.
Oh, absolutely.
I know, in an age where our phones are basically, glued to our hands, keeping a baby completely away from screens feels like mission impossible.
It really does. And you see it everywhere. A parent trying to finish a meal, maybe using a tablet to calm down a toddler, or sometimes the TV is just on in the background.
It's the new reality.
It is.
But that reality, it seems, looks very different from what we might think is okay. So let me just ask you, listening at home, if you have a 1-year-old, how much time do you figure they spend looking at a screen each day? Half an hour, maybe an hour, tops.
Well, the finding from the Giusesto study, which followed a really large group of children in Singapore, it's frankly pretty alarming.
Okay.
They actually measured it, and the average daily screen time for a 12-month-old infant was 2.01 hours.
Wait, two full hours
2 hours, yes.
on average, every single day. For a baby that hasn't even had their first birthday yet, that number just feels dangerously high.
It is. And what's really crucial here is that the standard deviation was also huge, 1.86 hours.
So what does that mean in simple terms?
It means a massive number of these infants were watching way, way more than that 2-hour average. This isn't just a few outliers. This is a widespread thing.
Okay, we have to unpack this. Our mission today is to go inside this groundbreaking study, which ran for nearly a decade. We need to get past just saying there's a correlation and really ask, what is the specific neurological mechanism? Is there an early brain signal that links screen time at age 1 to, cognitive outcomes 9 years later?
Exactly. We're looking for the how.
We want the how.
We're searching for that biological pathway. And
Yeah.
it's not really enough to just say screen time is bad. We need to know what it's changing in the brain that years down the line shows up as a real-world deficit.
Okay, let's start with section 1 then. The pervasive crisis and the warning. So we've established the average is over 2 hours. How does that compare to, the professional standard?
It's a drastic mismatch. They're not even in the same ballpark.
Right.
The main guideline comes from the American Academy of Pediatrics, the AAP,
Right.
and their policy is incredibly strict. They strongly recommend avoiding screen media entirely for infants under 18 months.
Entirely.
Entirely. The only exception they really make is for supervised video chatting, like a quick call with grandma.
Oh my gosh. So we're looking at an average of 2 hours versus professional advice of basically 0.
Essentially 0.
This isn't just slightly going over the line. This is completely blowing past the standard.
It really shows that what's common is absolutely not what's recommended. And that's why this data is so powerful, because it's longitudinal.
They tracked them for years.
Exactly. By following the same kids from 12 months all the way to 9 years old, they show that the effects of that early exposure are persistent. They don't just, fade away when the child starts school.
So if the impact is that deep, that persistent, we have to define what's actually being harmed 9 years later.
Yeah.
Let's talk about this term executive function, or EF.
Right. Executive functions are, to put it simply, your brain's high-level management skills.
Like the brain CEO.
That's a perfect way to think about it. It's the central system that controls your attention, your planning, your self-control. These skills are essential for, everything. School, relationships, mental health.
So if a kid has weak EF, their brain CEO is what? Constantly distracted, can't organize anything, and is super impulsive.
That's a great way to visualize it. So the study tested 3 core parts of EF with lab tasks called the NEPSY2.
Okay.
Those are inhibition, which is your ability to stop yourself from doing something impulsive, like blurting out an answer. Then there's shifting, which is that mental flexibility to switch your focus. And finally, working memory, just holding info in your head long enough to use it.
Like remembering a phone number while you dial.
Exactly like that.
So what did the 9-year report card look like for the kids who had those 2 hours of screen time as infants?
The findings were consistent and pretty grim. More screen time at 12 months was linked to big increases in problems that their teachers were seeing every day.
In the classroom.
In the classroom. Specifically, teachers reported more attention problems and more general executive control problems.
But the objective lab data is the key, right?
Mm-hmm.
Did those scores also take a hit?
Absolutely. On those precise objective tasks, inhibition, shifting, working memory more, infant screen time correlated with lower scaled scores.
And they were able to quantify it.
They were. For every 1 hour increase in screen time at 12 months, there was a measurable drop in those executive function scores. It ranged from about 0.30 to 0.56 points per task.
A drop of half a point might not sound like a lot to some people, but on a standardized test, even a small shift can mean a pretty significant dip in ability, right?
It translates directly to struggle. In these kinds of tests, half a point can be the difference between, say, the 60th percentile and the 50th percentile.
Wow.
It means these kids have objectively less cognitive capacity to plan, to focus, and to resist distraction compared to their peers.
Okay, so this is where it gets really interesting for me. We've established the outcome at age 9, but how in the world did they find a biological warning sign when the baby was only 18 months old? How did they look inside a toddler's brain?
That is the genius of this study. You can't really assess these complex skills in a squirmy toddler. It's just impossible. So the scientists looked for an early neuromarker using EEG.
Electroencephalography, so brainwaves.
Brainwaves.
And what specific indicator did they lock onto?
They focused on something called the theta-beta ratio.
Okay, you've got to break that down for us.
Right. Let's simplify the brain physics. Theta waves are slower waves. They're associated with drowsiness or maybe unfocused attention. Beta waves are faster, and they're linked to active, focused concentration.
Okay, I think I see where this is going.
So if you have a lot of those slow, unfocused theta waves and not enough of the fast, focused beta waves, you get a high theta-beta ratio.
And a high ratio is bad.
In neuroscience, a high ratio is basically the brain signal for I'm struggling to focus.
Yeah.
Think of your brain like a computer. Beta waves are the processing power you're using for your main task. If you have too many passive theta waves running like 50 tabs open in the background, it just drains your power. You get a high ratio and poor attention.
So they measured this focus struggle ratio at 18 months. How did it connect to the screen time the baby had 6 months earlier, at 12 months?
They found a classic dose-response correlation. It was linear.
Meaning more screen time?
Meant a higher, worse theta-beta ratio. More screen time at 12 months directly predicted a brain signal for poorer attention at 18 months. It literally showed up on the brain maps.
And where in the brain were these changes happening? Was it just everywhere?
No, and that's the key. The effect was mapped directly to the frontocentral and parietal regions.
Which are not random.
Not at all. They are the core neural areas responsible for working memory and executive control. It's where you house the cognitive CEO. The screens were linked to electrical changes right where the action is supposed to happen.
This feels like the scientific heart of the study. How did they use that specific electrical change to prove it was the bridge? The link between infant screen time and the problems at age 9?
They use some very sophisticated statistics, something called structural equation modeling, and they confirm that this specific change in EEG activity, that high theta-beta ratio at 18 months, actually partially mediated the long-term association.
Okay, partially mediated. Let's talk about that. What does that really mean for us?
It means that the screen time didn't just happen to correlate with bad outcomes later. It established a biological mechanism. They found that this specific electrical change went on to explain about 39.5% of the EF problems they saw at age 9.
Wow. So nearly 40% of the attention problems we see in a 9-year-old can be traced back to this specific change in brain electricity that happened before they were even 2.
That's what the model suggests.
That's groundbreaking. That establishes the how.
It confirms a solid biological pathway. It seems that screen time, even at what we might think are low levels, physically alters early brain activity. And that altered activity is a strong predictor of future cognitive struggles.
Okay, now we have to bring in the nuance. As powerful as this is, the researchers are very careful to say this is an association, not direct proof of causation.
A critical point, yes.
So that raises a huge question. Is it the screen itself that's the villain, or is it just a proxy for something else going on in the environment?
This is so important. We can break it down into two main possibilities. The first one is the direct impact model. This one focuses on the screen itself.
And that's based on the idea of a video deficit, right?
Exactly. Explain that a bit.
Why do babies struggle with 2D content?
Well, infants, especially before 18 months, they just lack the cognitive framework to easily process 2D information, particularly if it's fast-paced or, fantastical.
Right.
So to keep up with all that overwhelming visual and sound input, their brain is forced to rely heavily on what we call bottom-up attention.
Bottom-up being the raw sensory stuff, the bright colors, the loud noises.
Exactly, the sensory pathways. If the child's brain is just constantly reacting to this hyper-stimulating content, it's using up huge cognitive resources just to track it all.
And the consequence of that is?
The consequence is that there are not enough resources left for developing top-down attention.
And that's the CEO's job. That's the prefrontal cortex.
Precisely. Top-down attention is controlled by the prefrontal cortex, the very system that drives executive function. If the child is always just reacting to stuff on a screen, they don't get the practice they need to actively control and direct their own focus. It stunts that EF system.
Fascinating. So the screen itself could be distracting the brain from its own developmental work. What about the other idea, possibility to the screen as a proxy factor?
This argument suggests that screen time might just be a stand-in for what we'd call cognitive impoverishment in the home. The problem isn't just what the screen is doing, but what it's displacing.
What crucial interactions is it replacing?
It replaces what developmental psychologists call experience-expectant inputs.
Which are?
Things like high-quality, reciprocal, back-and-forth interactions with a parent, rich language. Screens are passive. Development thrives on that serve-and-return interaction. When you're reading a book with a child, you share attention, you talk. When a child is just watching a screen, that whole process shuts down.
So the end result is the same, whether it's a direct neurological distraction or just the loss of that critical connection time.
That's the takeaway. The mechanism could be both,
Yeah.
but the effect on the developing EF system is robustly negative.
Okay, so despite these really strong warnings, there is a silver lining here. Executive function is a highly trainable skill, isn't it?
It is, and that is the good news. Since the prefrontal cortex develops so rapidly in the early years, we have this incredible window of neuroplasticity.
A chance to intervene.
A critical chance. Timing interventions before those brain circuits get locked in later in childhood is absolutely key.
So for all the parents listening right now, maybe feeling a little panicked, what are the actionable takeaways from this study that they can use?
Okay, first and most important. Follow the science and the guidelines. Adhere strictly to that AAP recommendation. Avoid screens entirely before 18 months, except for video chat.
And this study really backs that up.
It does. It shows even small increases in screen time correlated with these negative neural changes. So strict limits really, really matter.
So limit the bad input. What about maximizing the good inputs?
Focus intensely on quality reciprocal interactions. That sensitive caregiving, that intentional back-and-forth dialogue. That's what regulates an infant's physiological state and directly stimulates EF development.
And a screen just can't do that.
It simply can't replicate that complex, three-dimensional social and verbal input that a developing brain requires.
We also can't ignore that the researchers themselves pointed to the family context, right?
Right.
They said socioeconomic factors were really tangled up in all of this.
Absolutely. They noted that household income was a strong covariate. Lower-income households often face more economic stress, which is itself linked to poorer EF outcomes. That stress might make a family more likely to rely on a screen as a sort of low-cost babysitter.
But you need more research there.
We do. We need to fully tease apart the direct effects of the screen from all the environmental factors that go along with it.
Which brings us to our final synthesis. We've established today that screen use in infancy is powerfully associated with real, persistent deficits in attention and executive function at age 9. And we know this pathway is measurable, it's predictable, through an altered brain signal, that high theta-beta ratio that we can see at just 18 months old.
It's a potent warning signal.
It really is.
And if we connect this back to the bigger picture, the fact that household income consistently correlates with both infant screen time and these cognitive outcomes, it sort of transforms this from just a parenting debate into a critical public health issue.
Right. It's bigger than just individual choices.
It is. Understanding the infant brain's vulnerability to screens really just highlights these profound socioeconomic disparities. Disparities in access to the time and the resources that are needed for optimal early childhood development. And that's something we urgently need to address, as a society.
And that's a wrap on this episode of MedDecode. I really appreciate you joining me today. If something we talked about sparked your interest, or if there's a medical term that's been bugging you, let me know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this, be a pal and share it with a friend. We'll catch you on the next one.